You ever wanted to seek revenge before? Somebody wrongs you, does something to you, and the thing that seems like it'll be the most satisfying in that moment is just getting that person back, either in the same identical way that they wronged you, or maybe in a way that you just kind of stick it to them that much more. I remember hearing a comedy routine, I think it was done back in the 70s, of a guy who gets hit in the face with a slush ball in the middle of winter, and he knows the exact kid who did it, and so that same night he makes just the perfect snowball and goes on this hunt all over town to try and find this other kid, can't find him, and so he's not satisfied with that, and he takes his snowball home and he puts it in the freezer and he waits until July, his birthday in the middle of July. So however many months he's been waiting and planning and scheming this thing, and in the meantime, as he's waiting for this perfect opportunity to get revenge, he makes best friends with this kid who hit him with the snowball, and he wants to lull him into a false sense of security, right? So that just when the moment is just right, he can go and whack him in the face with his own snowball, and it's just going to be the perfect thing. Turns out, on the day when he's planning to do this, he goes to the freezer and finds that his mom has thrown the snowball away, and it all sort of falls apart. But we can sympathize with that feeling of wanting to seek revenge. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a feeling that we should embrace, but it's something that we struggle with from time to time. As we look more into the story of Joseph this week, we're going to see Joseph given an opportunity, a perfect opportunity really, to get revenge against his brothers, the ones who, from the outside looking in, worldly speaking, have put him in the position where he's in, who have made his life miserable. Yes, he's in a good place now as he's this ruler in Egypt, but the road here was not smooth. It was not without its pain. It wasn't without his suffering, and so he would have had an opportunity here to really get back at his brothers. In Genesis chapters 42 to 44 cover this reuniting of Joseph and his brothers, and it's interesting because, you know, Joseph is a ruler in Egypt, and so likely was dressed like an Egyptian and looked like an Egyptian, and his brothers came to Egypt to buy food because they were caught in the same famine that Joseph had said was going to happen when he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, and so they came to Egypt to buy food. They heard that there was food there, and when they arrived, Joseph recognized them right away. They didn't recognize Joseph, right? They weren't expecting to see Joseph ever again, and if they saw him again, it definitely wasn't going to be as some sort of a ruler in Egypt, because they had sold him as a slave, and so likely they were assuming that he was either still a slave or dead, definitely not someone who they were going to run into again. Joseph recognized them, and it's what happens in Genesis 42 to 44 isn't really revenge that he takes, even though he has the opportunity to do that. It's more of a test of his brothers to see if his brothers are still the same scoundrels who sold him into Egypt, or if there's been some softening and some change. And so he accuses them right off the bat, because they don't recognize him. He accuses them of being spies. You're not here to buy food. You're just here to spy out the land. Everyone's, hurting in every different part of the world. You're just here to see if you can make our lives worse. And they insist, no, we're not spies. We're brothers of the same father. We have one more brother back home. We have one brother who is no longer alive. And they leave out the detail there as to why he's not alive, but they acknowledge that they used to have a brother who's no longer with them. And they insist that they're not spies. And so Joseph says, all right, I'll believe that you're not spies, but in order for me really to believe it, you got to go back home. You got to bring your younger brother back. They start to protest, and they say, you know what, this other brother is our father's favorite. If we bring him here, and something were to happen to him, it's not going to go well for Jacob. It's not going to go well for our father. And so they push back against that, but Joseph insists, and he binds Simeon, which is one of the 11 remaining alive sons, 12 sons, because Joseph is still there, but you know what I mean. One of the sons who had come to buy food, bind him up before his brother's eyes, throw him in jail, and say, if you want to see this brother again, the next time you come back, you got to bring your younger brother with them. Sends him home. When they get home, there's one more surprise, because all of the gold that they paid for the money or for the food that they brought home is in the mouth of their sack. And now they're all sorts of confused and probably concerned. What if this guy thinks that we've stolen from him now too? And there's all sorts of torment, and Jacob is understandably upset, because not only is Joseph gone, and there's this reality that Benjamin may have to go on this next trip to find food, but now Simeon is now not with them anymore as well. Time passes, their food runs out, the famine is still on, and so Jacob again sends his sons to Egypt to buy food, and he very, very, very reluctantly sends Benjamin along with them at this point as well. Now Judah, another one of the brothers, has promised that he will look after Benjamin, and if anything will happen, his father can take his own sons, Judah's sons, as, you know, payment essentially for that. And it's kind of a strongly worded thing, but you get the sense that Judah is willing to take responsibility for Benjamin here in a way that the brothers never did for Joseph. And maybe we can see a little bit of softening through that. The brothers head back to Egypt. This time Joseph recognizes Benjamin, and he's so overcome with emotion that he has to, you know, to avoid blowing his cover, he has to run away to another room, and he cries, basically. He spends some time just weeping at the magnitude of this all, composes himself, goes back together, has a big feast with all of his brothers and celebrates with them, brings Simeon back out, and the next day they load up their sacks of grain, and he sends them home with blessings, and all 11 of the brothers head home at this point. Once the brothers are ways away, Joseph tells some of his servants that, hey, go check out their sacks of grain, and my cup will be in one of them. He had planted it here ahead of time, and so the servants go, and sure enough, they find Joseph's cup in no one's sack except Benjamin's, the youngest son. So the brothers are dismayed. They tear their clothes. Now what are we going to do? Load up their donkeys, go back to Egypt. When they get back to Egypt, Joseph is furious, or at least pretends to be furious, and is very, very upset that his cup has been stolen, and that they would do such a thing to him after he treated them so well. And the brothers are concerned about what's going to happen. And then Joseph says, you know what? Benjamin's the only one who stole anything. The rest of you guys can go home, take your food, go in peace, but he's got to stay here. He's the one who wronged me. He's got to stay here. And it's here where we see Judah step up and offer himself as basically a sacrifice to save the life of Benjamin. And that sounds a little bit scriptural, right? This idea of someone else stepping in and taking the place and taking the punishment of another person. Judah says, you know what? If we don't bring Benjamin home, he's talking to Joseph, if we don't bring Benjamin home here, our father will die, likely from shock of this. This will kill him. And we can't be responsible for that. We cannot bring our father's gray head down to the grave in shame. And he basically presents himself as someone who is willing to step into the punishment that Benjamin, you know, appears to deserve in this case, if it means that Benjamin will go free and his father won't have to endure the loss of another favored son. Next time, we're going to see how this all resolves itself, because it does, and we're going to see Joseph recognizing and acknowledging and telling his brothers that, you know, all this bad stuff that has happened was intended as harm against him, but God was in control and God has used it for good. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. What I want you to see out of this week is the opportunity that Joseph had for revenge. He could have totally gotten revenge on his brothers here. He was in a position of authority. They were in a position of submission to him. He could have made their lives miserable. He could have killed them. He could have sold them as slaves. He could have done whatever he felt like in this role, and he had the power to do it. And yet he recognized that, you know, the dreams that he had as a kid were coming true, and he recognized God's hand at work here, and he held back. We're not always necessarily going to see, you know, God's hand clearly at work in times when people wrong us, but the idea of choosing not to seek revenge, even though it's so counter to what our natural heart wants to do, when we can understand that, you know what, ultimately God knows. God will make sure that justice is served. He is the one who will make everyone answer for the wrongs that they commit. It frees us from having to try and seek that revenge against someone else. And as you've experienced, I think as we all have, even as kids, you know, we hit the kid back who hit us in the first place, and it feels good for a bit, and then all of a sudden doesn't feel that great anymore, and it just escalates the situation. It just kind of makes it worse. Revenge promises a lot, but rarely is able to follow through on it. And so if you can learn something from this week in Joseph's life, it's that, you know, God is still in control. And he is ultimately the one who will work things out and bring justice about, and revenge just doesn't do what it promises it's going to do. So yeah, this video got a little bit longer than some of the other ones did, but I hope it was helpful, and yeah, I hope you have a great week. We'll talk to you again.